All right, we're back. Episode 5. Buckle up for this one because we are about to address one of my all-time favorite topics, but this one can get a little spicy. So, here we go. So, for the next 3 episodes, I'm going to be breaking down a few of my core values as a human and also as a practitioner and a professional. So if you have ever visited my Instagram at Elsa Karinke, you will see that at the top of my bio, I list 3 core values or ideals that I strive for as a human being, in my own personal healing, and also with my clients. And those 3 ideals are radical responsibility, total transparency, and limitless freedom. So the first 2 are kind of more like ingredients in the cake of healing, and I view the last one as the promise of healing. And freedom is really, I would say, my highest ideal as a person. I feel like I came here to be happy, joyous, free. And that doesn't mean that I don't experience really intense lows sometimes, you know? We all have our moments, and I allow whatever's moving through the container of my awareness to be there while it's there. But for the most part, I really do live in a state of joy and freedom and liberation, and I'm content most of the time. And even though I get frustrated sometimes about the pace of my healing and how slow it seems to go oftentimes, I am incredibly grateful that I've been able to get to a place on my path where I really do savor every part of the experience, you know, and I've gotten to a point where I really have faith that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and I trust the unfolding, and I'm trusting more and more that if I just stay the course and go at the pace of my body and honor that at all times, I was going to say I'll get where I need to go, but honestly, there is no where I need to go. There's just the path and what is in the present, and I'm becoming more and more okay with surrendering to that. So today we're going to unpack radical responsibility. If you asked me what is the one single most important thing that someone needs to really move forward on their healing path, this is it. Radical responsibility, 100% every day of the week. And the reason why responsibility is so important is because we are never going to heal or progress on our path from the seat of the victim. And I'm not going to get too deep into victim consciousness and how pervasive I believe it is on this episode. There will be an episode sometime in the future all about victim consciousness, I'm sure. I've always had kind of an intuitive aversion to victim consciousness, and I've always been very aware that it definitely is a block to healing. But I'm starting to really dive into victim consciousness and Cartman's trauma triangle and examining in a whole new way how it shows up in my life, sometimes through the back door and in very sneaky and insidious ways. So I want to wait until I've been sitting with that on my own journey for longer before doing a full episode on that, but that is coming. And I will touch on victimhood and victim consciousness throughout this episode because radical responsibility is the antidote to victimhood. So why is this so important? Radical responsibility really puts us in the driver's seat of our life and helps us make that incredibly important shift from walking through life as if life is happening to us, to the mindset and the reality that we are the co-creator of our life. And I'm not talking about like manifestation. I'm talking about being a force, a powerful creator of your own reality, and trusting that life is happening for you and not to you. And I want to pause here and say that if you're not there yet, and it's not authentic for you to approach your life as if life is happening for you and not to you, that is okay. That is a stage of the game. I stayed in that stage for a really long time, and nobody could have pushed me out of that stage until I was ready. People suggested the idea that life was happening for me, but there were certain events in my life that were really traumatic that I hadn't processed, or certain circumstances that I had a really hard time accepting. And so when people were like, this is happening for you, this is happening for you, I just kind of wanted to give them the finger and tell them to shove the it's happening for you, you know where, you know? And so my mind was closed to that idea. But I also wasn't really able to change my circumstances from that perspective. The same kinds of things kept happening, quote unquote, to me over and over and over again. But that's because I approached life from that lens, that everything was happening to me and that I was powerless to create change or to create a different outcome for myself. And that held me back for a really long time. And I'm really beginning to open to this idea that there is just absolutely no forcing. We have to play out our patterns until we're done. We have to move at the pace of our slowest part. And so once again, if what I'm about to say seems way out there for you, that's okay. If what I'm about to say seems like something you want to adopt for yourself, but you keep getting stuck in this pattern of victimhood or thinking things are happening to you, keep showing up. Keep opening little by little. Keep working with a practitioner. Keep letting yourself be seen. Don't let this pattern hide in the closet, you know? I've said this in almost every episode so far, but it really helps me on my path, and it helps a lot of my clients to just be reminded that your job is to show up on the mat. If you consistently show up, things will shift, but you have to surrender the timeline. So I just wanted to make sure that I said that up front, because this can be intense for some people. And you may not be ready to hear it. You may not be ready to hear it all. Words. You may not be able to hear it at all. That's okay. You might be able to hear it, but you can't imagine how that would ever be your reality. That's also okay. You may be able to hear it and try to start implementing it, but it's just not quite working for you. That's okay. And you might hear this and be like, yes, I am freaking ready to take radical responsibility, and it's your time, and it's just all systems go. So wherever you're at on that map, know that you're in exactly the right place for right now. Radical responsibility is a key foundational piece of addiction recovery. And this is another one of those moments where I am infinitely grateful, and will always be infinitely grateful, that the 12 steps and addiction recovery was my first introduction to healing and this whole world, really. Because I was taught very early on, at the very beginning of my journey, that I am responsible. And I was instructed to take inventory and look at my part in things and then make amends for my part in situations. And that is not fun. I was taught early on in recovery that when one finger is pointing out there's 3 fingers pointing back at you, And I did not want to hear that for a really long time. And I bucked up against that for a really long time. And even when my mind started to open to the idea that, okay, every single thing that has happened in my life, I have made choices that have contributed to that. There were certain situations in my life, there were certain events that were kind of off limits. Like I could not make this leap into that arena. And it took me time. And something that one of my mentors early on told me was that even if, so the dynamic or the event is 100%. Even if you are only responsible for 10% and the other person is responsible for 90%, your job is to take responsibility for 100% of your 10%. And I was like, okay, I think I can do that. Like that seems accessible to me. That seems possible to me. And that is important to mention because we live in a time where we are so overly cautious about victim blaming that we turn the concept of radical responsibility into victim blaming a lot of the time. And it's not. They're not the same thing. So to take radical responsibility for your life, for what happens, for your healing, this does not mean that you are at fault. That does not mean that other people have not done things to you that have caused you harm. That does not mean that you have done all of these things wrong. However, the only way to heal and get free is to take radical responsibility for our choices, our part, and our healing. So for example, I've referenced in several episodes the development of our nervous systems and how when we are infants, we essentially share a nervous system with our mothers. I referenced that a lot in the last episode. You can go back and listen if you want to learn more. But of course, if you want to look at it from a cosmic soul level, we might have a little more choice in who our parents are. But let's just say we come into this world, our parents are who they are, and we are not responsible for the state of our mother's nervous system. And she may have imprinted some pretty not so ideal ways of coping and regulating. However, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to assume that you are an adult. So even though the trauma that occurred was not your fault, as an adult, it is your responsibility for healing it. Period. The end. Nobody's coming to save us. And it took me a really long time to fully grasp this. And at first it can seem like a burden. It can seem like a lot to take on. But if you actually really unpack radical responsibility, it is the most liberating thing that you can imagine, because if we have the belief that other people or particular circumstances in our life need to change for us to heal and for us to get free, we are going to be prisoners our entire lives. We are going to be waiting our entire lives because we do not have control over other people or external circumstances in our lives. The only thing that we have the power to change, to create from, is ourselves. And so when I really unpacked what radical responsibility meant, I was like, oh, I can heal. Regardless of what anyone else in my life does, I'm the pilot of this ship. Oh my God, this is amazing. And I stopped pointing the finger at everybody else, and I started looking deep into my own stuff. And I'm not saying that this is fun. It's not. Taking radical responsibility is adult shit. This is big girl stuff, or big boy. Most of my clients are women, but I do work with men, and I'm a woman, obviously. So for me, this is big girl stuff, big person stuff. You know, there's this trend these days in relationship culture where, you know, you break up with someone and then all of a sudden they're a narcissist. Like, everyone is a narcissist all of a sudden. And what this does is, through labeling the other person a narcissist, it abdicates us of any responsibility for the relationship dynamic. And as a person who has dated severe, actual, serious narcissists in my life, I spent a lot of my life pointing the finger and blaming everyone else for my messed up relationships. And then finally, when I hit a low enough bottom and I got desperate enough to really take my healing in this area seriously and to really address this problem for myself, I had to look at me. I had to ask myself the question, who was I that chose them? Who was I that tolerated their horrific behavior towards me? Now, once again, this is not saying that these abuses and these relationship dynamics were my fault. This is not saying that the other person didn't do wrong. But I don't have control over them. I only have control over me. And so I had to ask myself, why was I allowing people to treat me so poorly? What's that all about? What's going on inside of me that is creating and fueling this dynamic? And I will tell you, that was one of the most intense, painful inquiries of my life. But it was also one of the greatest portals of transformation, because I was finally able to heal wounds from my entire life. And I was finally able to claim my self-worth in a much deeper, fuller, richer, more expansive way. And I have not dated a narcissist since then. And I know that I never will again, because at the first sign of that not so good treatment, I'm out. I'm not putting up with that. Ain't no way. Because I am not that girl anymore. I have changed. I have transformed. A lot of people would say that looking at myself in that way was victim blaming. And a lot of people would say that I was a victim of these men, which, once again, their behavior was 100% wrong, and I'm not excusing it. But I'm the one that doesn't want to be in the dynamic anymore. So it's on me to heal and change. And that has been so empowering. And that is one of the greatest gifts of healing for me, is this ability to take radical responsibility. Radical responsibility has given me the ability to heal at the level I have. It's given me the ability to meet myself in the depths that I have. But also, the more that I grow and the more that I heal, the more of this radical responsibility I'm able to take on, and the more I want to take on. And the more I want to look under the hood, and the more I want to really be like, okay, what is driving this behavior? Is this the outcome my soul would want for me? Or am I playing out some pattern right now that's not serving me? There's a line in 12-step literature that says, whenever I am disturbed, there is something wrong with me. And I'm not going to elaborate too much on that. I'm just going to let it land for you. Whenever I am disturbed, there is something wrong with me. Chew on that one. I might do a whole episode on that at some point. But I want to make it really clear that radical responsibility and victim blaming are not the same thing. It can be true that really bad things have happened to you and other people have done really horrendous things to you, and you can still take responsibility for your part in the dynamic. You can still take responsibility for your healing, and you can still take responsibility for your life and your freedom. They're not mutually exclusive. Both can be true. But when we approach life from this internal orientation, this idea that we are the co-creator of our reality, life is happening for us, versus the perspective of life is just happening to me and it's random and it doesn't make sense and I'm a victim of life. Those are two radically different points of view, and they create radically different life experiences. So I encourage you to really unpack that for yourself. Are there spaces in your life where you resist taking responsibility? Are there exceptions to, where you're willing to take responsibility? Because radical responsibility is extreme. I mean, this is total responsibility. This is really, really, really being like, okay, I'm responsible for my life, and I'm going to do what it takes to create the life that I desire. That's what it comes down to. And for me, creating the life that I desire involves deep transformational healing work. Maybe that's true for you, maybe it's not. But I do believe that the degree of responsibility that we take for our lives is the exact degree of freedom that we get to experience. Radical responsibility leads to limitless freedom. It's like a straight path. I mean, there might be a lot of twists and turns along your healing journey, don't get me wrong, but the more responsibility that we take for our lives, the more free we get to be. And when my first sponsor used to ask me this all the time, when I would resist healing, when I would resist assignments, when I would not want to take responsibility for my actions, my behavior, my patterns, she would never make me do anything, but she would ask me this question, and it was kind of like one of those trick questions. She'd be like, okay, like, you don't have to do that, but how free do you want to be? She'd always end with that. She'd be like, okay, no big deal, you don't have to do it, but how free do you want to be? And my answer is, I want to be totally free. Complete, limitless, boundless, super expansive freedom. That's the level of freedom that I want. And so that's the level of responsibility that I have to take for my life. And so I hope that this video inspires you to take radical responsibility for your life, for your healing. If you've been resisting or making excuses or feeling like you're not ready, this doesn't mean that you have to blow the doors off your system. That doesn't mean you have to blow yourself out or go way out of range or, tackle the biggest trauma you've ever experienced right away. But it does mean you have to make a beginning. And it does mean you have to look at situations in your life and be like, okay, where am I responsible? And how can I heal? How can I take steps? How can I change this? How can I live more in alignment with my highest expression? How can I live more in alignment for what my soul came here to do? And that is what radical responsibility is all about. Sending you lots of love, and I'll see you next week for the next episode.